We're back. We have roots of Black radicalism, historical archaeology of the Black radical tradition, resistance in North America. Big purr, big purr. Oh, and I hit a little afternoon bake. I did. So bear with me, y'all. Black resistance in North America. So, the litany of rebellions and maroonage continued into the 18th century in the Guyanas of Berbais, Essequibo, and Demerara. I hope I pronounced that correctly. In the 1730s and 1760s, in Jamaica in the 1780s, in Cuba. How are you supposed to pronounce Cuba? Why are you so over there? Because I put you there. Cuba. Is it Cuba? Or anyways, in the 1780s and Venezuela in the 1730s and 1780s period. As the capitalist strata of Western Europe achieved political, social, and ideological maturity, their jockeying for hegemony over the world system reduced African labor in its homelands and the New World peripheries to pawns of power. State banditry, as E. P. Thompson named it, became the modus operandi that weeded out the landed nobilities and integrated their survivors with the rising bourgeoisies. Intensive exploitation of labor became the basis for purchasing new sortings of intra-European domination. In the overseas territories, in the slave societies of Cuba, Brazil, North America, Jamaica, and Haiti, restive colonial elites amassed wealth, but envisioned how much greater and diverse that wealth could become without the parasitism and restraints of state and trade imposed by the dominant orders of the mother countries, like England, France, blah, 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 yada, yada. My cookie. I was literally looking at my cookie while I did that, and it, like, anyways. For the ruling elites, too, enslaved African labor, that is, the super exploitation, became the key to their liberation. So the key to colonial liberation, like, you know how the American colonies had wars with British and blah, 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 blah? The key, right, that's what that's speaking to. The key to their liberation as colonies was the super exploitation of enslaved Africans. Okay, right. All, whether landed nobility, landed colonists, or the masters of long distance trade, believed the brutality of the slave system to be the practical necessity. Maroon settlements like those of Jamaica, Cuba, and North America had to be destroyed, or failing that, quarantined. They could not be allowed. And think about that in connection to the MOVE movement and the bombing of Philadelphia in 1985, I believe it was. Right, and then Black Power, and then this, and then that, and think about that. How much is your why are you so threatened? I mean, obviously, now we know why, but like, and think about, like, you know what? Let me shut up. I'm gonna need to delete that TikTok. Sorry, I just see that? Okay, anyways. They cannot be allowed to contaminate a labor upon which they cannot be allowed to contaminate a labor upon which much depended. Too frequently for the masters, however, it did not seem to matter. Who, then, resisted slavery in the 18th century? The records concerning armed revolt indicate that it was mainly African-born, including male and female, young and old, plantation slave and urban slave. This emphasis on the African-born may have been for the simple reason that Africans outnumbered the Creoles owing to the low birth rate on the plantations and the heavy importation of Africans. Owie, what's on my foot? Wars of repression then still had to be undertaken, severe discipline maintained. Even then, the master's nightmares kept recurring, and their hysterias periodically assumed endemic proportions. As Christians, it might be added, they were possessed by a mythology of apocalypse too easily converted into frightening visions. At every opportunity, as Joshua Giddings' Tale of Florida reminds us, the logic of maroonage was manifest. The efforts of the Carolinas to enslave the Indians brought with them the natural and appropriate penalties. The Indians soon began to make their escape from service to the Indian country. The example was soon followed by the African slaves who also fled to the Indian country and, in order to secure themselves from pursuit, continued their journey into Florida. We are unable to fix the precise time when the persons thus exiled constituted a separate community. Their numbers had become so great in 1730 they were formed into that. Let me restart. We are unable to fix the precise time when the persons thus exiled constituted a separate community. Their numbers had become so great in 1736 that they were formed into companies and relied on by the Floridians as allies to aid in the defense of that territory. They were also permitted to occupy lands upon the same terms they were granted to the citizens of Spain. Indeed, they in all respects became free subjects of the Spanish crown. In North America, the maroon communities of the mid-century in Florida, Virginia, and the Carolinas were anticipated by slave revolts in New York City in 1712 and that of Stono, South Carolina in 1739. In the final 70 years of the century, Gerald Mullen found in Virginia newspapers alone advertisements for nearly 1,500 fugitives from slavery. Colonial North America was particularly vulnerable to slave liberation movements in those regions where blacks made up the majority. At the century's beginning, South Carolina and the eastern counties of Virginia were two such areas, and in the early 18th century of South Carolina's African population was being hastily enlarged at a rate in the 1730s of more than 1,000 per year, according to Peter Wood, as a concomitant for the colony's growing domination by rice production. Harvey Wish writes that the plantation system had yielded bumper crops of slave uprisings and revolts. Girl, and we don't learn about this, like, whatsoever in high school. We learn that, oh, y'all was slave. I mean, depending on where you're at, like, in the southern states, you're more likely to get a conservative history. And whereas the north, you'll get a more liberal history, but it's still embedded with the racism and anti-blackness. Like, even the history that I received, I'm like near DC, so you would expect, oh, it's progressive, like blah 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 blah. No, it conforms to, unless you're like actively seeking that information out and or have challenging information from home, which I'm grateful that I had. So like in school, I'd be like a little bit pressed. I'd be like, okay, you guys are lying. Like, I hated history and I hated English class because of the ways that, like, one, it mentioned no black people, but I could see how people were becoming more prejudiced or like whatever based off of like the implicit messages, and I just was like, ew. Sorry, let me keep going. Where were we at? Okay. Oh, but then we didn't learn anything about black history, barely anything about black resistance. They omitted the Black Power movement. I was like, girl. That's the ending, period. Okay. In 1713, 1720, and 1730s, and the 1740s, conspiracies and actual rebellions were routinely reported to London. From the early 1780s, the black liberationists were further encouraged by the action of the Spanish king, Philip V, who authorized granting them liberty once they reached Florida. In 1738, when 69 slaves escaped to St. Augustine, they were settled at Pueblo de Garcia, Rio de Santa Teresa de Mos, or Moose, 2.5 miles north of the city. Then, 10 months later, in September 1739, South Carolina was shaken by an incident which became known as the Santo Uprising. A group of slaves struck a violent but abortive blow for liberation, which resulted in the deaths of more than 60 people. Fewer than 25 whites' lives were taken, and property damage was localized. But the episode represented a new dimension of overt resistance. Go. Free colonists, whose anxieties about controlling slaves had been growing for some time, saw their fears of open violence realized, and this in turn generated new fears. It was several months before the officials of the colony were satisfied that the Santo Rebellion was over. By then, however, a second conspiracy in June of 1740 demanded their attention. Reports of and official reactions to Maroons continued into the 1740s, but with the formation of Georgia as a free colony of black slavery until 1750, the southern route to liberty became more hazardous, both for the slaves and the Georgian colonists who sought to impede them. Still, Henry Lawrence, distinguished native, had cause to note that in a letter dated the 21st of March, 1748, a most horrid insurrection in the colony. In colonial Virginia, trials of Negro rebels began to dot counties' records. I want to look that up. I want to see if it is do you ever walk around your town and think about wherever you're at and think about the history that occurred? Girl, I'd be looking stuff up and I'm like, oh! But still, go black people, black people, but still, I went to a school that was in a sundown town, and then, girl, it's so much tea, but I don't want to put my information out like that. So that's something I'll write down and tell you guys later when I move in terms of my location and the history, because I'm not trying to. But still, that's so interesting to me, learning about the history of where you're at, type of thing, or where I was born. I still have to look that up to know the context in which I came from. Right. Anyways. In colonial Virginia, trials of Negro rebels began to dot the county records as early as the late 17th century. Seldom very expansive, the records of the period most often reflected official fastidiousness. In James City County, on the 30th of May, 1688, for example, the disposition of a case remanded from Westmoreland County earlier, the 26th of April, was concluded by the General Court. It appeared that Sam, a Negro, served to Richard Metcalf, hath several times endeavored to promote a Negro insurrection in this colony. We shall never know what this man said to his accusers, his reasons, or his achievements. We do know that Sam was ordered to be whipped around the town and fitted with an iron collar. Dang, dude. I can only, when you see the images and how, dude, I saw this mask. Okay, I don't even want to think about that, but I saw this mask and it had irons for going into the eyes. It was just horrible, and I'm just what? That is literally, that is so sickening and so evil. Okay. But that iron collar with 4 sprigs that he was to wear until his death. It was hoped that dude. But I like that. You know what I really like though? Learning despite the because of how severe the punishments are and how severe the plantations were in the environment for enslaved people, and Black people in America and or the African diaspora wherever, the best thing to learn is about their resistance. To me, like when even in history class, like they would talk about some of the like the really bad stuff, but they would never mention the resistance or barely mentioned the resistance. And to know about the resistance and like to be like, oh, they did this and they saw this stuff and they still resisted, baby, go Black people, go Black people. You know what I mean? So to understand the gravity of the situation in terms of slavery and learning about it, and then also understanding like the full picture of the resistance, it makes it like even more like tremendous to see, to understand, to know what our ancestors did and be like, damn, like girl, you got it. You got it. Like I'm only here because of what you like. I think about the stuff that I went through. I'm like, you know what? I cannot. Let me stop complaining. Let me stop complaining because right, right, right. But still, okay. It was hoped that this would deter him and others from the evil practice for time to come, running away or like Negro insurrections. Just how effective the general court's punishment could perhaps be judged by the fact that in the counties of Surrey, Isle of Wight, James City, Middlesex, and Gloucester, several plots involving the first Indian and blacks and then blacks separately were reported discovered in 1709, 1722, and 1723. And in 1770 in 1727, a maroon community of Indians and blacks, which its inhabitants called Des Nata not Nata Anapale. Nata Anapale. Nata Anapale. Nata Anapale. Natanapale, was betrayed by a former resident. Further maroonage in Virginia and neighboring Maryland had been reported by Alan Kulikoff. A few Africans formed communities in the wilderness in the 1720s when black immigrants was high in the frontier close to tidewater. At least two outlying runaway communities were established during the 1720s. 15 slaves began the settlement of 1729 on the frontier near present-day Lexington, Virginia. They ran from a new plantation on the head of the James River, taking tools, arms, clothing, and food with them. When captured, they had already begun to clear the ground. Another small community evidently developed on the Maryland frontier in 1728 and 1729. Harry, one of the runaways, returned to southern Prince George's County to report on the place to his former shipmates. He told them that there were many Negroes among the Indians in Monocacy. Sorry, y'all. And tried to entice them to join the group by claiming that the Indians were soon going to attack the whites. He was like, "Come on, y'all." But girl, it's so good. It is so good. But the history of maroonage in colonial Virginia is still far from complete. In a period of 1718 to 69, during which Philip Curtin calculates the proportion of Africans brought directly to the colony increased, the absence of the mention of maroonage in the 1750s and 80s seems odd. This is particularly the case when General Mullen informs us advertised runaways were prominent, 12% of them being described as African-born or outlandish, and a third of the fugitives were thought by their masters to be headed for inland North Carolina. Nevertheless, there is evidence of such communities in the late 18th century in 1781, in what was by then a commonwealth, as well as reference to maroon communities having been established in areas of South Carolina 1765 and Georgia in 1771, 1772, and 1780s. In the colonial and post-colonial periods. Again, it was precisely in those places where blacks constituted a substantial proportion of the population, North Carolina, where the 1790 census put the slave population at 28%, Maryland 34.7%. Girls, hold up. In North Carolina, it was 26.8%, Maryland 34.7%, Georgia 35.9%, Virginia 40.9%, South Carolina 43.7%. That the available records indicated rebellions and maroon activities was most likely to occur. Moreover, it was precisely these black populations that demonstrated in the century's eighth decade the capacity to respond to British overtures during the American Rebellion and to the presence of British troops and propaganda. Jack Foner writes, at the very time that the American Army ended the practice of recruiting blacks, the British adopted it, hoping in this way to overcome their acute manpower shortage to cripple the rebellious colonies economically by including slaves to desert their rebel masters and seek refuge within the British lines, and to convince the blacks by offering them liberty in exchange for military service that their freedom depended on the success of British arms. It was like, girl. Nonetheless, as Jeffrey Crow cautions, the slaves' response to the machinations, plot, or scheme, I looked that word up, of the British General Thomas Gage and Lord Dunmore, governor of colonial Virginia, had its independent context. And this is like the quote. But the slave unrest that accompanied the opening stages of the war was too widespread to have been the work of a single British conspiracy. They're like, I don't think the British really convinced the black people they wanted it to be free. I think the black people knew they wanted it to be free before the British was like, hey, we'll give you a little. And the black people were like, okay. Anyways, let me stop doing that. I just think it's funny in my head because, you know what? Though royal governors and military observers had often commented on the potential for a massive slave insurrection in the southern colonies, from the Chesapeake to the Georgia coast, black insurgents sprang into action even before the British tendered their help. Okay. Rebellious slaves had always been attentive to the crisis among their exploiters, and any momentary advantage, whether it was the master's absence for a few days, the French-Indian War, or a nationalist rebellion, was likely to be seized. They was like, girl, they fighting, let's go. And that's the same with the Civil War. I believe, yes, the Civil War, they made it about themselves. Because when we get into the Civil War chapter, girl, we're talking about slavery and capitalism with Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And he's talking about, like, the North versus the South. And he even says, like, the North... Oh, wait. In the North, the dictatorship of property had been manifest in capital and investment, blah, blah, blah. Oh, not as rich as or as powerful. They, like... At first, the South was very powerful because of, like, antebellum. Right. No. Postbellum. Antebellum, right. The plantations had more power, whatever, and then the North was like, okay, let me just read the part and then we're gonna move on. Not as rich or as powerful as the plantocrats in the beginning, the northern merchants, manufacturers, and industrialists had developed on the backs of the southern agriculture and European labor. The North exploited its labor more efficiently, not having to absorb the cost of developing it during the non-productive years. Those costs were incurred on the socio-economic sectors of Ireland, Germany, Italy, and England. The North supplied the middlemen between the South and its European and domestic markets. It supplied the shipping and transportation of the South's produce. It was also in the process of developing a national economy of total integration before the Civil War, while the South was becoming increasingly dependent. Okay, we're at 24 minutes. Wait, let me just get to the part. Capital, both industrial and financial, continued to grow until the northern industrialists could challenge the political power of the plantocrats. And then that's when, once the industrial class emerged as dominant in the nation, blah, blah, blah. But that's in chapter 9. We're still on chapter 6, so we'll come back. Where were we at? Wait. Hold up. Hold up. Oh, okay. In those rare occasions when the slaves perceived the appearance of a powerful ally, it was with the British during the 1770s, the consequences would be dramatic. Contemporaries estimated that the South lost as many as 55,000 bondsmen. Crow suggests many evacuated with the British or were emancipated. Others simply attempted to pass as free blacks. They was like, girl, they can't tell. They're racist. They can't tell the difference between different black people. By 1775, the leaders of the Continental Army had been compelled to compete with the British authorities for blacks, both for their efforts on land and sea. And though some fractions of the ruling class continued to resist the enlargement of the slave soldiery, notably the state legislators of Georgia and South Carolina, and in the end, more blacks were enlisted as combatants by the nationalists than by their British opponents. After the war, however, the British military proved to be a more faithful ally of the slave soldiers. Not surprisingly, then, in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Virginia, the 1780s and the 1790s were times of rebellion in the young republic. Black assertiveness in post-war North Carolina revealed a greater collective consciousness among slaves and an increasing willingness to use violence to liberate not only individuals but groups of slaves. In 1738, the Chowan County Court tried the slave Grange. I don't know this word. I think it's a name. Grainge for the atrocious crime of endeavoring to stir up slaves for the diabolical purpose of murdering their masters and mistresses. Boo-hoo! In the summer of 1795, Wilmington suffered sporadic attacks by the number of runaway Negroes who, in the daytime, secret themselves in the swamps and woods, and at night commit various depredations on the neighboring plantations. In Bertie County in 1798, 3 black men were accused of heading a conspiracy of 150 slaves armed with guns, clubs, swords, and knives. Right. And it was not only the slaves who were dissatisfied with the political issue of the rebellion. During the waning months of the war, whites joined them in attacks on the plantation in Virginia's Goochland and City, formerly King George counties. See, this is what we do when we get rid of racism and some working. You know what? Let me stop. Okay, next is the Haitian Revolution. Okay, how many pages is this? No, we'll give that its own video. Bye, y'all.